here we are today with Aled Bryce Jones. He's the president of IITAYATA, is the International Amateur Theater Association. Thank you so much for being with us, Aled.
No problem. My pleasure.
So I will start this conversation with this first question, which is, when and how did you become involved in the field of arts and inclusion?
Okay, yeah, I suppose it was in the mid-90s. I was running an organisation for amateur theatre in Wales, and it started to become a requirement of funding. So it was driven from outside. The people who were offering the funding to the organisation, the government bodies, were saying, what are you doing to integrate disabled people? What are you doing to make sure that your services, your membership, that people who have a disability, that they can access those services? So we had to start developing policies in order to get the money. So it was very much an outside initially sort of way of working. And then I was invited, I can't remember exactly when, I was invited to help direct a residential school for disabled actors. I suppose that would have been around 2005, 6, I can't remember exactly. But yes, somewhere around there. I've been running residential summer schools for 20 years and for amateur actors. But this was about bringing together a group of disabled actors with various different impairments from right across the sort of disability spectrum, to bring them together to work as a company, to work towards a professional production. This was a group of directors who had experience of working with disabled actors, but they didn't know anything about sort of running residential schools and all the rest of it, and the kind of training needs. So they invited me to help there, and that's what really got me involved.
So can you tell me a little bit of that experience? How, like, being in charge of this but like going from like, okay, we have to include these kind of programs because of funding, of being like in charge of an organization? Well, how would it look like?
It was, we decided to be very brave, and we decided to be very ambitious, and we auditioned 3 separate auditions across the country, quite large scale auditions, invited people who had an interest in acting, who had been involved in acting in some way, either through school or through youth theatre things, or were already trying to work as professional actors, but with a disability of some sorts. We auditioned over a couple of months, and we selected, if I remember correctly, we selected 12 actors. And as I say, with impairments right across the disability spectrum. We had some with sensory impairments, hearing impairments, blind. We had 3 or 4 actors with learning disabilities, and various different things, very physical disabilities, and brought them together over a period of, I think it was about 2 weeks, in a residential sort of a farm in the middle of nowhere, but with accommodation. And we worked with them through workshopping to create a production, which we put on at the local theatre, and invited the great and the good from across Wales to come as audience. And then we toured it then around Wales for. It wasn't easy to tour because of the requirements of the group. We toured it for about 6 months, but that would have been not a lot of performances. There would have been about 1 performance a fortnight over that 6 months. It wasn't possible to do it any more intensive than that. But we had a lot of funding to do that, a lot of funding support, government's funding support to do that. It was a fantastic experience. What can you say? An enormous learning experience for me. There were three of us working as the artistic directors, all declaring a disability, the three of us. One colleague is hearing impaired. Another colleague had a sight impairment, and the three of us had to find ways of communicating, and in order to be able to move the group forward, because there were also similar impairments within the group. So the focus initially was very much on building those communications and making those communications work, so that we could come together as a group to work effectively. A lot of it was about finding means of communication.
That's really interesting. Because like now that we just work with this online workshop, you know, like it's also again like finding ways to communicate with people, like also like from different countries. Yeah, I want to ask you, what do you think that, like after this experience that you have, what do you think that it's the role of art in inclusion?
I think it's a key role. I think it's a key role in life, regardless of whether you have an impairment or whether you're part of a protected group of society. It's a key role in how we communicate with each other, how we express ourselves, and how we identify ourselves. So if your communication is different because you have an impairment, then you may need a different way of expressing in order to be able to put yourself across. You may also, because of those impairments, you might find yourself marginalized from society, outside society, difficult to find a job, difficult to socialize, difficult to attend normal, for want of a better word, groups, and find yourself isolated. So finding new ways of expressing yourself, the role of the arts in that, in providing the tool for that expression, for my money, is key. Somebody who then becomes part of, whether it's playing an instrument, whether it's painting, whether it's craft work, whether it's dance, whether it's theatre, you're joining a group, and then therefore you're building your own society. And if that society has a common interest, because they are all disabled, then you have other elements of sharing life experience, sharing the trials of life that you're having to deal with because you have an impairment, the ways around those trials, the way around finding accommodation, finding accessible work, finding jobs, things like that. The network that you build as a result of being involved in the arts on a collective basis provides a whole means of actually survival. Because if you're having to find, you may be supported by the state, depending on what country you're living in, you may be supported by the state, but that doesn't provide everything. And you can still be living in a one-bedroom flat or a studio and not seeing the outside world. The arts provides that tool of expression, that tool of communication, that tool for coming together. I think it's key.
It's quite interesting what you're saying, because it's all about like communication and a collective like experience that arts provide, you know. And like I would like to ask you, can you like elaborate a little bit more around theater, because like I feel like theater itself is actually one of the collective arts, you know, like, and also as a way of communication, it's a very important thing in the field. Like, can you elaborate how particularly theater has like an important role on inclusion on your experience?
Theatre has a massive role to play. Theatre can convey the message, because the message is all too often ignored, forgotten. I come from, I'm over 60. I come from a generation where anybody with a disability would have been hidden at home, and you wouldn't see the disabled brother, cousin, sister, whatever, that they didn't come into life. So through theatre, you have the opportunity of creating that message, making sure that people are visible, are included, for people to take part themselves. And all too often, you know, I mean, we've moved on from, I can remember one production I saw many years ago now, where a group of actors with learning disabilities were given Michael Jackson songs to mime to. And you know, that perhaps was one of the moments where I decided, right, I need to be more involved in this, because what I'm seeing hurts, because those people didn't understand why they were on the stage. They all they knew was that they'd been told they had to move their mouths to the Michael Jackson songs, and just thought, oh no, this is so wrong, this is so wrong. So when you start to give people the opportunity to express themselves and to put their own voices on the stage, to put their stories on the stage, to tell people what their lives are about and what their lives are like, and then perhaps to be able to create theatre around that, to dramatize their stories, to make sure that it's their voice that is being heard, that they're presenting their voice, that they have ownership over that, then you're in a different world altogether. And then when you move on from that into including actors with disabilities into mainstream theatre, according to their ability to engage and to perform, then you're in a different world altogether. And we start to include rather than exclude. Sorry,
that's wonderful. No, I totally agree. So like, I want to move on to another topic, like, because since you have been in charge of different organizations that work on that field, I would like to ask you, like, what kind of challenges have you faced leading these kind of organizations? Like, main challenges that you think, like, it comes not only on your journey, that also probably is on everyone's journey that work in this field. You know what I mean?
It's a minefield. It's a minefield. There are so many things you can get wrong. There are so many ways that you can make mistakes. But I suppose the most important thing to do is to not be frightened of making the mistakes. This is uncharted territory in many respects. You are going to make mistakes. We are going to make mistakes. We're going to say the wrong things, use the wrong language, potentially offend individuals until we learn to get it right. So it is a very much a learning experience for everybody involved, and it's about managing those expectations. If you go in, if somebody working with actors with disabilities, you have to have different expectations and different parameters for the way that you work. It's about respect, it's about understanding, it's about creating new expectations around the work that you're doing. If you work in traditional ways and go in with a script and say, right, we're going to perform this script, we're going to rehearse from 9 o'clock in the morning till 6 o'clock in the evening, and we'll take half an hour for lunch, then you're ignoring the fact that some people have a different journey to get to that rehearsal if they're dealing with a disability, with an impairment. You know, if you have a visual impairment and you've got to get the kids ready to go to school, it takes longer. And it takes longer for you to get to that rehearsal space. And you may have to leave earlier. And if you have a different kind of disability, a different kind of impairment, then your energy levels will be very different. And how long you can spend concentrating and rehearsing will be different. And so it demands a great deal of a director, a great deal of a company to be able to say, right, okay, we're only going to work on this for X amount of time, and we're going to have space for this, and we're going to work differently, and we're going to work on we're going to work to ensure that everybody is working to the same level, and that takes courage. It takes time. Yeah, and it's easy to get it wrong. It's easy to make mistakes, but it's, as I said at the beginning, it's having the courage to try and to admit the mistake and move on. I'm talking from experience, obviously.
No, that's great. It's interesting that when we were talking with the people who were in the workshop, and the teacher, one of his like thoughts was actually, yeah, we have to like dare to do it, you know, but at the same time, like in this case that we work with young people with Down syndrome, they were like so open to like also fail, you know, to like they weren't scared. Sometimes it's the opposite, you know, it's like the people who are leading, they're more like cautious than the people who are like there to like experience the moment. And that it's interesting to think about it as well.
The interesting thing about that is as well that in my experience, working with people with learning disabilities with Down syndrome, they very rarely forget their cues and things like that. They're fantastic at you can go for weeks without having performed or rehearsed, but the entrances, the exits, the cues are they're all the rest of the cast. Where do I come in? Is this my entrance? You know, that sort of thing. The kind of practical things they've forgotten a lot. But my actors who had learning disabilities, wasn't a problem. They knew exactly where they needed to be. And it's about the sense of humor that comes from it as well. There's a community of language. There's a community of humor, and it's a shared humor, and it's a laughing at our own condition. It's permissible because it's ours. It's owned by us. It's our identity. It's our sense of humor. And it can be very cruel. And it can be very in your face and very politically incorrect, politically incorrect. And to begin with, you go, you can't say that, but it's theirs. It's their humor. And we had one situation where we workshopped around a sort of a gang situation, two opposite gangs, sort of the sort of Romeo and Juliet sort of thing, the Montagues and the Capulets, the West Side Story, what have you, the two separate gangs. And we didn't know what we were going to call these gangs because we didn't want to make it the Montagues and the Capulets. So it became the spastics against the cripples. And I said, well, no, you can't do this. Why not? That's who we are. Okay. And so we abbreviated it to the spazzes against the crips. And that was fine for them. It's our story, it's our language, it's our identity. Don't take it away from us. Let us own it. And I suppose it's like using the word queer instead of, queer politics are queer politics. So why can't disability politics be cripple politics? You know, it's their language, it's their ownership. And that was interesting. And when you move on from there and allow that language to develop itself, then you're allowing even more freedom of expression over ensuring that their story is being told.
Wow. Yeah. How interesting is that?
I'm not sure if I answered your story, but your question, but
no, for sure. I think it's quite it's quite a valuable learning to like be aware that in this case we are here, like, or whoever is working with them is for them to like tell their own story. So in that sense, yeah, wow, no, it's quite interesting because I like, in order to like finish like this conversation, I was gonna ask you about like which valuable learning have you like discovered in your journey, And I actually think that you have shared a few by now, but like either way, I would like to ask you to like to wrap it up. If you have like something that you want to share with us, or like to this community that work on this field that could, I don't know, like help tackle those challenges that we all face working in this.
I think, you have to establish relationships. I mean, a lot of the time disabilities are invisible. It's not always about somebody with a prosthetic leg. It's not always about somebody who can't see or can't hear. The disabilities can be to do with mental health. They can be internal disabilities to do with rheumatoid arthritis or something like that. They can, but the individual needs to determine whether or not they have a disability. And all too often, there can be a kind of a pecking order, a hierarchy, whereby if people have a visible disability or are a wheelchair user or something like that, that there is a kind of a perceived priority of disability, if you like, and that people with invisible disabilities are kind of marginalized within the disability community. So it's about acknowledging that it's up to the individual. The individual decides whether or not they have the disability. It's acknowledging that society disables us, not the impairment, that society creates the barriers that prevent us from taking part and from being included, and that the job is about reducing those barriers. And if we start to put barriers within our own communities, if we start to create barriers within our own communities by saying, well, are they really disabled? I can't see anything, then we're creating our own problems. That it's about all coming together, creating our own voice, our own way of communicating, and for challenging the things that prevent us from doing that. If we keep on challenging, if we keep on asking questions about why, like it is for any minority group, whether it be about race, whether it be about color, whether it be about gender or sexuality, it's about challenging those barriers that prevent us from participating at the same level as everybody else.
Thank you so much, Ale, for this conversation. Would love to keep talking, but we're gonna find another chance. But by now, I wanna just thank you so much for being with us. Yeah, that will be it. Thank you, everyone who's watching. Bye-bye.